Help sick and injured children by donating to my Extra Life campaign. Link in the description and pinned comment. All proceeds go to Children's Wisconsin. If we reach $1,000, I'll make my Discord server public. The only NFTs you'll see featured on my channel are my next featured topics. One of the things I like about making these videos about arcade games are the times when the situation calls for expanding the knowledge of my dear viewers. I have a good feeling that at least a few of you looked at the title of this and asked yourself, what the hell is a Moon Cresta? Who created it? Can I eat it? First off, no, you can't eat it, it's a game. Second, before I get into the what, let me tell you about the why. It actually starts with, of all things, an April Fool's joke. You see, April 1st is a time that is particularly dangerous for hype because companies tend to make gag posts. Sometimes the gags are obvious and there to give us laughs and nothing else. Those tend to be harmless. Unless the gags are racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, or otherwise bigoted. Those gags can fuck right off. Other times, you get what PlatinumGames did in 2020. It started with a trailer, advertising a game called Soul Cresta. That was a sequel to a lesser-known game called Moon Cresta and its sequel, Terra Cresta. And it ended up being a joke. That is, until a year later, when PlatinumGames and Hamster, the publishers of the Arcade Archive series, decided, you know, our little joke actually got a few people interested. Let's actually do this! So yeah, Soul Cresta is real now, and is probably already out as you're watching this very video. But why would Platinum be interested in a revival of this series? What makes it unique from any other arcade space shooter? Well, strap in, folks, we're about to dive into some obscure gaming history with the Moon Cresta series. But before we dive into the what, I should probably give you some background on the who. That is not what I meant! Anyways, let me tell you about a company called Nichibutsu. Nichibutsu was the main video game arm of Nihon Busan Company Limited, a company established in 1970 which started out selling arcade machines rather than making games themselves. The other half of Nihon Busan was known as Sphinx, who made games which I dare not show here because I'd end up getting flagged for violating community guidelines. Nichibutsu started making their own games around 1978, and by making their own games, I mean that their earliest works were blatant copies of other games. Table Attacker was a copy of Breakout, Moonbase was a Space Invaders clone, and Moon Alien was a ripoff of Galaxian. They actually had to pay Namco excess royalty fees because they sold more copies than they initially agreed upon. Moon Cresta was actually one of their first wholly original games, released in 1980 on the Galaxian hardware. The game was self-published in Japan and Europe, and published in the US by Sega Gremlin, as well as by Centuri under the name of Eagle. The game was one of Nichibutsu's most successful games because it brought a unique twist to space shooters at the time. So let's pop a quarter on the slot and start this baby up! Before that though, let's start by taking a look at the title screen. Trip to the Space War. What, they're trying to make this sound like a vacation or something? Try it now! You can get a lot of fun and thrill! Ah! That's about as subtle as a rocket engine! But this right here, this already shows what separates Moon Cresta from the likes of Galaxian. This ship has 3 segments to it, and each of those segments is one of your lives. Lose all 3, and it's game over. There are 10 levels to each loop, 2 waves each of 5 different types of enemies. You start off with your Stage 1 rocket and its tiny single-shot pea shooter blasting at these weird alien eyes. They fly in figure 8 patterns and then split apart to charge you. That's the thing with enemies in this game. They don't fire shots at you, they prefer the kamikaze tactic. So after 2 waves of this, you get a new enemy, alien bugs. They swoop around with no distinct pattern, so you need to be very careful with this and enemies in general. So after wave 2 of the bugs, we get to what makes this game unique among space shooters. In this stage, you're tasked with docking your ship with the next stage of the rocket. Your ship has crazy inertia in this stage in particular, so you need to be subtle to get this to work. You can also use the button to slow your descent. Make the connection and your true bonus goes beyond points. you get more firepower for the next 4 waves. This could be seen as a precursor to the double ship in Galaga. Of course, if you blow it, well, you literally blow it. The next 2 waves of enemies are a weird set of bugs that seem to phase in and out of reality, which can throw off your aim if you're not careful. This gets more challenging for more reasons than just the enemies, but that firepower bonus really helps. After all, 3 lasers are more effective than 1. After that, we have to deal with a bunch of meteors. Unlike the bugs, however, you just need to dodge the meteors to get past them. Good thing too, because you don't have that much of a window to blast the meteors since they move so fast. Having to blast them all while dealing with respawns would be a downright pain. At this point, assuming you didn't lose one of your ships before the first docking sequence, another docking stage happens, this time with the bottom stage of the ship. If you successfully dock all 3 stages of the ship together, you've got a real powerhouse on your hands with 5 lasers total for the final stages of the loop. These aliens are the most aggressive of the loop by far, dropping down at your ship like icicles before respawning up top for another shot. And you may notice that all of your extra firepower is a double-edged sword. A good look at your ship should show you why that is. Having all 3 stages docked together may give you a bigger spread of fire, but all that weight goes straight to your ship's hips and makes it a bigger target. In other words, you're going to need to be more careful to preserve your firepower. At least you won't have long to worry about it, because once the final 2 waves are completed, you fly off towards the next loop, starting again from stage 1 as the process repeats itself. And seeing that this is an early 80s arcade game, there's no end until stage 3 goes boom. It's kind of depressing if you think about it, considering the bad guys will eventually win no matter what. So there you have it, Moon Cresta. You've seen why this makes an interesting twist on space shooters at the time. The whole docking mechanic added a unique twist to the gameplay, as well as a clever risk-reward mechanic. It established Nichibutsu as a developer and was one of their most successful titles alongside a game called Crazy Climber. But that's a story I might not get into unless Platinum decides to make a sequel to that as well. However, before we move on to the next title, there were a couple of variations to Moon Cresta that added a little something extra. The first of these variants was Super Moon Cresta, released by Gremlin. This modification kit changed the enemies so that they fire back at you. Yeah, recall in the original game, all the enemies attacked only by ramming you and didn't have projectiles of their own. This simple addition makes the game that much more tense. Although, to be fair, the worst enemy in the game might be the constant background noise. Nichibutsu themselves later released Moon Quasar. This variant powered up the second ship's firepower and added an additional segment. In this segment, you need to attach to your flagship and refuel your craft. It has the same inertia as the docking segments, except you're moving in the opposite direction. It also has one of the dumbest title screens I've ever seen. It displays the name of the game twice and... Space Patrol Aboard? I'm sorry, but that makes no sense. Can you survive the last invasion? Is it ever the last invasion? The true sequel to Moon Cresta would be released to Japanese arcades in 1985 under the name of Terra Cresta. Unlike Moon Cresta, which was licensed to outside companies for international release, Terra Cresta was self-published in all territories, with the game releasing in North America in 1986. Despite being a sequel to Moon Cresta, Terra Cresta was quite different. As opposed to a single-screen shooter, Terra Cresta is a vertically scrolling shmup as you pilot the winged Galibur against the invading forces of the Mandler army. The oncoming enemies are not unlike the kind you'd find in Xevious. The power-up system again relies on docking, but in a different way from Moon Cresta. As you progress, you'll eventually come across hatches secured with numbered locks. When you destroy the locks, you'll open the hatches to release smaller ships, and they're gonna combine! There are 4 additional ships in all, and attaching to each one gives you a different form of power-up. Stage 2 increases your forward firepower, Stage 3 gives you a tailgun to take down enemies behind you, Stage 4 gives you a cannon that pierces right through an entire line of enemies in front of you, and the 5th and final stage of the ship gives you a shield to protect the general area of your 6. That's pilot speak for your ass, in case you were wondering. Now, even with all these power-ups, things can get hairy, which is why you have a defensive option. By pressing the second button, your ships can separate temporarily to expand your field of fire and protect your main ship, which is the only one that's vulnerable. And you'll want to protect that ship even when it's powered up, because aside from the obvious wanting to survive and all that, taking a hit will cause you to lose some of your power. So yeah, you gotta always be on top of things to make sure you don't get hit. And there's a very special reason for that as well. Sure, having all that offensive and defensive power is awesome in itself, but if you're skilled enough to gather all 5 ships together, they become a mighty Moltres! This superpower is actually shown on the title screen itself. It's like, you see this? Yeah? You can be this powerful too. See the bird. Be the bird. This power only lasts for a limited time, but the bird is completely invincible, disintegrates enemies by touch, and is very much the word. Of course, even when it wears off, you still have a crazy powerful ship. Only now it's vulnerable. So keep that formation button ready! As for the stage itself, it's an endless loop punctuated by 3 different bosses. The first is Tubo, a shuriken-shaped ship that fires regular shots and spike balls. Second up is Daikun, an insect-like ship which launches mini-ships in addition to its standard shots. Mandler itself is a multi-armed torso on a spaceship which fires fists which become homing projectiles as well as energy boomerangs. Once you defeat Mandler, the core flies away, making one last attempt to kill you before the loop continues. And eventually you lose all your lives and get a game over. Wasn't this around the time that games started having concrete endings? Now, a couple of interesting things here in Terra Cresta are sound-related. First of all, the jingle when you start a new life. When you first start the game, the jingle gives you that time to get to the mission vibe. Pretty exhilarating, right? Now listen to the jingle for starting a new life after that. Basically, it's an abbreviated version of the first jingle. Same vibe, only shorter. Now when you're down to your last life, the jingle becomes this. Now you have that sense of urgency, as if to say it's now or never, do not screw up. But if you listen closely, you may notice something. Yep, this is the same as the game start sequence from Moon Cresta. Hey, you gotta have that thing called continuity somewhere, don't you? Another interesting thing about Terra Cresta is that it has 2 different versions of the soundtrack, stemming from the fact that there are 2 versions that differ on which chip was used for the sound. One version had the YM2203 chip for audio, giving off a sound that sounds somewhat more advanced than the NES. Later copies of the game used the more advanced YM3526, which gave off a more defined sound and made the full version of Terra Cresta's main theme possible. If I had to compare the sound quality to anything, I'd say it sounded a bit like what we would later hear on sound cards for Windows 95. As for the graphics, advancements at the time allowed for more fleshed out and lush backgrounds, making for some great-looking scenery and well-defined sprite work. Terra Cresta definitely reaped the benefits of how much technology had progressed since the release of its predecessor, and as a result, further fleshed out what Moon Cresta started. Now, there were a couple spin-offs that could be considered distant cousins. The first, called UFO Robo Dongar, was released in 1986. Unlike Terra Cresta, where you built the supership piece by piece, your main ship is 3 spacecraft which form into a giant robot right off the bat. This game was created as an homage to giant robot anime of the era, like Voltron. Another distant relative, called Formation Armed F, released in 1988, brought back the formation button, but it worked a bit differently. Instead of the docking ships, a power-up would give you escorts called armors, which could change firing direction with the formation button. There were also a couple of sequels for the game that should be noted here, though they were Japan exclusive. The first is Terra Cresta 2, Mandler Strikes Back, which was released for the PC Engine in 1992. That's the Japanese name for the TurboGrafx 16. The main gameplay was pretty much the same, except that it was blocked off into stages and had a defined ending as opposed to the infinite loop of the previous game. However, it also had some extras, like a time attack mode, power-ups that can increase your formation stock and can even give you special formations, and an option to customize your formation layout, something which was a carryover from the NES version of Terra Cresta. The game was decent enough despite the departure of Shigeki Fujiwara, who was the creator of both Moon Cresta and Terra Cresta. His absence, however, would be felt more with the last game on this retrospective, Terra Cresta 3D for the Sega Saturn, released in 1997 in Japan.
What the hell is this?
Just looking at this can show you that this was a significant step back from Terra Cresta. 3 ships instead of 5, ugly graphics even for the Saturn, unnecessary perspective changes. It's a wonder this game even got made considering the state of Nichibutsu at the time. In fact, it was one of the last games Nichibutsu would actually make aside from those other games. They ended up suspending video game development in the early 2000s, becoming mainly a distributor of their old games for compilations and such. Ultimately, with the retiring of their founder, Soeharu Tori, the company went out of business in 2015. Which begs the question, how is a sequel to one of their classics even happening in the first place? Well, the answer is simple. When Tori-san retired, he sold the company's entire library of IPs to another company. The company in question? Hamster. That's right, the very company responsible for distributing all manner of classic arcade games to modern platforms now owns the entirety of Nichibutsu's library, which gave them license to do whatever they want with those games. And they decided to partner with PlatinumGames to make Moon Cresta, which is available right about now. And now, after having watched this video, hopefully you have an idea of what to expect with this reimagining/sequel. And this is being labeled as Neo Arcade Classics Volume 1, implying that these people have plans to update even more games for modern audiences. Considering the fact that Hamster does own Nichibutsu's library, it makes me wonder what else they have planned. A new Crazy Climber, perhaps? As long as it isn't any of that live service crap that's being hinted at, I'm interested. I'm the Quarter Guy, and until next time, the arcade is closed. Every year, hundreds of promising franchises fall victim to first game syndrome. It's a dangerous condition which threatens to stymie the growth of a series before it even has a chance to flourish. Be aware of the signs, unrefined controls, rough game mechanics, and a general lack of polish. This condition can be treated if caught early, giving your franchise the chance to develop and improve. Next time, top 10 cases of first game syndrome. It's game time! Hey everyone, QG here. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, and share the video around. Feel free to check out my Twitter and my Twitch streams, and consider supporting me through Patreon and donating to my Extra Life campaign to support Children's Wisconsin. Thanks for watching.